before I start, I'm just going to be very practical. I'm someone who walks, and I've been told to stand behind this desk because of the mics. If I start walking, call me out and tell me to get back to the desk, because I will start walking at some point. So yeah, okay, so we're going to talk about resurrecting the dead, tales of an accidental maintainer. Now you may wonder, what is an accidental maintainer? An accidental maintainer is a maintainer of a project where they never intended to become the maintainer from. So let's have a look at some examples. I'm the maintainer of requests, which is a dependency of WordPress. I'm the maintainer of PHP parallel lint. And in these cases, both of these projects, I'm not alone, which I'm really grateful for. There's someone who's a co-maintainer. Neither of those were the original maintainers. Again, they are also accidental maintainers. And for some of these projects, I barely ever looked at the code even before I became the maintainer. Now, how does this happen, you might wonder? Well, typically it goes like this. I submit a patch because, for instance, PHP 8.4 is coming. I see a deprecation because one of my dependencies is causing my builds to fail on their code. So I submit a patch. And the patch doesn't pass their CI. And for those people who don't know CI, continuous integration, all those automated checks where you run the tests and code style and everything. So my build doesn't pass, but it's not because of my patch, but because their CI is out of date. So either they're still on Travis and Travis isn't running anymore, or they're using outdated versions of action runners and Node 16 has been replaced with Node 20 and things aren't working anymore. So I need to go in and fix their CI to get a passing build. So that takes another 4 patches. And then the waiting game starts. And we wait and wait until a maintainer maybe starts looking at the patch. And maybe they don't, and if they don't, then community pressure starts building. People saying, Juliette, can't you take over? Can't you just fork? And I'm like, no, I've got enough on my plate. But yeah, sometimes in the end, that is the only solution to get a working dependency again. Now, the latest in this list, and you've already heard this mentioned, is PHP Code Sniffer. How many of you have never heard of PHP Code Sniffer? Okay, I see 3 hands. Basically, in the PHP world, there are 2 big tools who help you with code style and sometimes also some code quality checks. CS Fixer and PHP Code Sniffer. And PHP Code Sniffer is the biggest of the 2. And CS Fixer basically does a subset of what Code Sniffer can do. And I got a message in November last year from the maintainer basically saying, I'm abandoning it. Now, Code Sniffer is slightly different from the other 2 projects. I'd already been an established contributor to Code Sniffer for about 7-8 years. This is a code base I knew reasonably well, but it's also a code base with over 5 million downloads a month, with nearly 500,000 dependents in my estimation. So it's sort of like, okay, it's being abandoned, now what? This is too big to fail. But there's no one else who can take over but me. And I kind of already have other obligations. But yeah, I kind of felt I didn't have much of a choice. So yeah, that happened. Welcome, I'm new maintainer of Code Sniffer. Now, how does this happen? Typically, when you start a project, it's all nice and dandy and it's all green. And maybe you just started because you want to experiment with something. Maybe it's just, something for yourself. And a lot of projects never come out of this first greenfield stage, I'm just trying something. But sometimes a project gets more popular and then it reaches a mature stage. This is the ideal stage for projects to be in. A mature stage, well-maintained. Yes, of course, some technical debt slips in, but it also gets handled at some point. And yeah, then sometimes life happens and the project goes to the next phase, and that's the zombie phase, where the project is still alive, it's still working, but it's not actively maintained. In a lot of cases, luckily, projects then waver between the zombie phase and the mature phase. And that's a good thing, that's okay. As long as they keep going back to the mature phase on a regular basis. Unfortunately, this doesn't always happen, and then you get this situation, a project which basically dies. So, what are the reasons for abandoning a popular project? Anyone? Simple answer is life happens. Whether it is someone getting kids and wanting to spend more time with them, well, good for you. Or, elderly parents who need taken care of. Or sometimes, you might get ill, or other work pressures might take more attention and you just don't have the time anymore. And yes, sometimes life really, really happens. And I need to take a moment here to really bring this home. There's another project where, again, I'm an accidental maintainer, Composer PHP CS plugin. Originally, it was created by someone, some other people took over. There were 2 of them. I had, at some point, joined them. Now there were 3. That's a healthy situation in some ways for a small project. We're back to 2, because the 3rd person has been diagnosed with a brain tumor. This is not someone in their 80s. This is someone of the same age as you and me. They have a brain tumor, they are terminal. And the only reason I know about this is because we have off GitHub contact. Because this is not the kind of thing you open an issue about, by the way, I need to step back, I have a brain tumor. This is the reality. This can happen to any open source project, and we all need to be aware of this. Another thing I want to call out specifically here is maintainer burnout. This is a real thing, and it happens more often than you know. And the typical way to get to maintainer burnout is, well, let me tell you a small story. A maintainer says, okay, I need to balance my work-life balance better. I need to balance a better balance between the open source commitments I have and my paid work commitments. So basically, I need funding for my open source work to be able to do less of the other paid work. And companies don't hear funding, they just hear help. So they start putting people on the project. And those people are generally people who've never contributed to the project before, which then leads to really low quality PRs, which then start piling up, and the maintainer, who was already overworked and unpaid, then basically needs to start training the employees for that company and reviewing these really low quality PRs, which they're desperately trying to ignore because they're a time suck. So then community pressure again starts building, like, yeah, but those PRs are rotting away, and why isn't the maintainer doing anything? So the maintainer again goes like, help me with funding. And companies start putting more people on the project. Please do not be that company. If you put people on the project, also put funding on the project, because the existing maintainers need time and energy to be able to review all those PRs and to coach your employees. So, how well do you know your dependencies? How well do you know the state of maintenance of your dependencies? Whether they're about to be abandoned, are they in a mature state? Are they in the zombie state? Are they greenfields projects? Where are they? And what happens if one of those get abandoned? I mean, an abandonment of a dependency, depending on how interwoven it is in your project, could mean the bankruptcy of a company. So being more aware of your dependencies is a good thing. Also knowing what the options are. Sometimes there is an alternative and you can just switch dependencies, switch from the dependency A to B. But dependency B may not have all the features which A has, so you might still need to start contributing to that new dependency. And it will still take some effort to change your project over. In other cases, there is no good alternative, or not an alternative which has the feature set even which comes close to what you need. So it might be more economically viable to hire a maintainer or train one of your own people in the company to start maintaining the project which is being abandoned. There are options, but you really need to be aware of what the options are, and you need to be aware of what the state of your dependencies is. So if a project is being abandoned, what are the scenarios which are possible? Sometimes you can add a new admin. But if a project is in a personal account, you cannot add a new admin because that's just not possible. So that already requires that a project is in a dedicated organization. But like for CodeSniffer, that it was in a dedicated organization, but it was in a company organization. And quite rightfully, I understand that they didn't want an outsider to give an outsider to the company admin access to one of their projects. So that didn't happen. The repo can sometimes be transferred. That's great because that means you keep all the issues, you keep all the history, you keep the PRs, you keep the wiki. Again, someone has to be open to that. You basically need the cooperation of the previous maintainer to do that. If they're not around anymore, that's not going to happen. So then you are left with forking the repo. In the case of CodeSniffer, I did fork the repo. I did it with the blessing of the previous maintainer, but they were not willing to transfer. It means you get a confusing situation because you have a second repo. You lose all the issues, you lose all the PRs, you lose the wiki, you lose the far download address, you lose quite a lot of information, and everything has to be reset up again. You lose GitHub pages. People need to find their way to a new repo. It's not ideal. The one really good thing which happened was that I was allowed to keep the package's name, the composer name for the package, which meant that, not all the dependencies had to switch that. But it's still not an ideal situation. The last option is let the project die. Now you might think, oh yeah, but then someone will take over and fork the repo. Yeah, about 50 people will do that. And then nobody knows which fork to contribute to. And in about a year's time, the project will still have died. Yeah? So, what does it mean to be a maintainer? I'm just going to let you read this for a second. Basically, nothing ever just works. Whether it is a new PHP version coming out and deprecations needing to be fixed, whether it is a new PHP unit version coming out and the code, the test needing updating, whether it is Travis abandoning open source and everyone needs to move to GitHub Actions, there's always something going on. There's always something which needs attention. Nothing ever just works. If something in your perception just works, someone is actually making it so. So what does maintaining mean? It means keeping things running. It's not necessarily the fun stuff. It means making sure that you unblock contributors to your project. Make sure that they can get a green build on their PR. It is working through technical debt. It is working through, all those little changes which just need attention. What it also means, envisioning the future. Making a roadmap of where you want to go. For CodeSniffer, I've got a roadmap planned out for PHP/CS 4, 5, 6, 7. I've not published all of that because I don't want to overpromise, because then again you get disgruntled users. Yeah, but you said you were going to do that. Yeah, but that's only going to be, in PHP/CS 6. So you publish what you know you can do in a foreseeable future, but you do plan for a longer future. That doesn't mean there's no room for new ideas to come in. It just means you map things out already and you plan for where you want to go. What maintaining does not mean is bug fixes and new features. That is the on-ramp for new contributors. Of course, sometimes you will take these on, but most of the time you want to leave these issues open. And you want to give other people the chance to start contributing to your project to grow the contributor base. Does this still make sense to people? Good. Now, let's see about preventing abandonment. I think if I talk about healthy and unhealthy projects, people will recognize the images I'm going to show. Basically, a healthy project has multiple maintainers. It has a first line circle of regular contributors who are involved with the project, who know the project, who watch the project. And then it has a looser circle of drive-by contributors, occasional contributors. And the great thing about having these circles is that people can move between them. So a drive-by contributor, an occasional contributor can move to become a regular contributor for a while and can move back again. A maintainer might want to become a regular contributor for a while because pressures are in their own life and step back a little and then later go back to being a maintainer again. So this is healthy. Unhealthy, you have a single maintainer and maybe one or two occasional contributors. This basically means you have a bus factor of 1. If that one person gets under a bus, the project is done for. This is high risk, and unfortunately, it's the case with the vast majority of open source projects. So be aware also of the health status of your dependencies. Now, one thing to mitigate this is to start doing succession management. And I'm not going to say this is easy, it's not. But I'm going to give you some idea of what succession management can entail. First of all, document things. Document the processes. Document how decisions are made in the project. Document release processes. Something as simple as that. I had to completely figure that out from scratch again because it wasn't documented. Document all those things to make them transparent and to make them easier for the next person to pick up and to understand. Activate the community, and that can take lots of different forms. That can be done via labels, a good first issue, help wanted. It can be done via contributing guide. One of the things I did in CodeSniffer was I created a community CC list. Sometimes there were issues where I, in the past, at random would add some people on a CC, carbon copy list, to ask their opinion. But I wanted to take the random out of it. There's a lot of projects built on top of CodeSniffer, so I wanted to get that community involved. And I also wanted them to be aware of plans for the future. So I asked who wanted to be on this community CC list. And as a start, I think there's about 10 or 12 people on it now. And it works. It was well received. It's one way, but for every project, what you do will be different. The next step, identify candidates for promotion. Identify candidates who could at some point grow into the maintainer role. Ask them if they want coaching, if they're open to that, if they want to grow into a different role in the project. Once you start coaching them, validate your trust in them. How many of you have heard of exec-utils? If you haven't heard of it, please, after this conference, add it to your search list on Google or DuckDuckGo or whatever. exec-utils. It was a state-sponsored attack on open source, which could have added a backdoor in nearly every server in the world. And it was done by putting pressure on a maintainer to add a second maintainer, etc. So validate your trust. And why is this for me important? CodeSniffer literally rewrites other code bases. It's too bloody easy to inject a vulnerability in other code bases this way. I need to know who I'm giving commit rights. Once people are ready, promote them. And then the last one, and I know some people say, how is that part of this list? Funding. Every project needs funding. Even if you say, yeah, but my company funds my time. Yeah, but it might be funding for a domain. It might be funding for specialist tooling, for a paid pro membership of certain tooling you use to develop your project, for a paid membership for an IDE. It might also be that the next maintainer or someone you want to add to the maintainer team does need funding. So start building up those reserves. Funding is not something to be underestimated. Another part of succession management is making sure you are not the only one with the keys to the castle. What are keys to the castle? Access to the repo, access to a GitHub organization, access to packages, access to the domains, to being able to change the DNS of domains you've registered. These are just some things. And this is important, and it's so easy to forget that. There is, however, a good feature. If you have a dedicated organization, you can just add a second owner. If you don't, if you have things in your personal account, GitHub has a feature which allows you to dedicate a successor. Please consider doing that, but please also ask the person you want to add as a successor for permission, if they want, if they're open to, if they're willing to take that on in case something happens to you. And yes, I have added a second owner to the GitHub organization, which now holds CodeSniffer, with permission. So, some things I've learned along the way, and I'm going to let you read this while I drink for a second. Open source is never free. If you think it's free, it just means you are not the one paying the price. In most cases, it means the maintainer is paying the price. And the maintainer is paying in their time, in money, and often in mental health. But open source is not free. Free and open source software was not about free as in money. It was about freedom. Freedom to use the code, not about taking advantage of it. So funding is not optional. And I mean this. Start having a conversation with the companies you work for. I'm not looking at individuals to fund projects. I'm looking at the companies who make money of them to fund projects. We need to change the conversation. Think of it this way. If you have a company building, you insure it when it's not on fire. If you use open source software and your business relies on that, and you don't contribute back to open source, whether it's in people or funding, you have an unmitigated business risk. And to mitigate that, you need to start contributing. See it as insurance. You insure the future of the open source project by funding the project while it is still being actively maintained. And just like insurance, it doesn't buy you a seat on the board of directors. So you do not buy influence by that. But you buy the chance, a much higher chance that the project will continue to be maintained. So if you talk to finance with this premise, you have a much higher chance of them listening than if you say, we want to give some money to some people. We want to donate some money. Donations is something finance is, it's the first thing they cut from the budget. Insurance is something they will never cut. So change the conversation, change the terminology. Don't call it sponsoring, don't call it donations, call it funding, because that's what it is. Right, so enough about all the money things, but I do think it's important to mention that. Some other do's, I already mentioned the funding channels. Another one is create a dedicated organization. I already mentioned accept utils. For me, it's something I'm very aware of. I don't want to give people commit too easily. At the same time, there are sub-projects which people could take on, which I'd happily give them commit rights to and have them take the responsibility for a sub-project. I can do that with a dedicated organization because I just create a second repo for that project. And that way I can have modular access rights to different parts of the total of the project. So it helps in creating an on-ramp for people to get to a stage that they can take the full responsibility. Another thing, expand the contributor guides. And yes, in CodeSniffer it was this and it's now this. And that includes clauses like do not use AI. And you might say, yeah, but it's so useful. Yeah, except on what code is it trained? Do you know the license on what of the code it was trained on? Do you know the copyright? There's no money in open source, or not enough money in open source. If I get sued by a company which says, yeah, but that code was stolen by me, I don't have the finances to defend myself. So no AI, please. Another one, use PRs and protected branches. Now, yes, I can commit straight to the repo, but if I commit straight to the repo, nobody sees it. If I use PRs, and especially when they're feature PRs, I leave them open for 3 days up to a week, again, I give people a chance to pitch in. I give people the chance to review my PRs, to voice an opinion, to actually contribute in that way and give them an on-ramp again to start contributing. I'm not infallible. I make mistakes, so please catch my mistakes just as much as I try to catch yours when you create a PR. So protected branches, PRs, CI, it's all created to keep you honest as a maintainer. So if there's no one else reviewing your code, this is the best you can get by making that as strict as possible. Signaling via labels, again, I've already mentioned that. That's one of the ways to draw people in, say, you know, this is something where you can help. Right. Last point, close quickly. When you maintain a project, if issues start piling up and PRs start piling up, at some point there's just a lot of noise. Anything you can close because it's a duplicate or because it's just not an issue, it's not something which needs fixing, it's a support request or whatever definition you want to give it, close it. Because the less you have to look at, the less you need to worry about. So some lessons I learned: say no a lot. And that's not something I find fun to do. One of the first PRs which was opened when I took over the repo was a PR which had been open for years in the old repo. We want a baseline, and instead of discussing how that should be designed, no, they created a PR and this is it. Except they'd sort of forgotten that PHP code sniffer has a fixer and that baseline would be invalidated as soon as the fixer was run. Do I want to take on support for that? No, I do not. I don't mind discussing how a fixer can be set up which will work with the fixer as well, how a baseline would work with the fixer. But that PR was not it, so I closed it and asked them to open an issue to discuss it properly. Have off GitHub contacts. I already mentioned one reason, because there's some things you just don't discuss in GitHub issues. But it's also sometimes to have a sparring partner, to have someone, I mean, you are in the end responsible, but to have someone to sometimes just bounce ideas of, am I still on the right track, is helpful. So have off GitHub contact with people, to just spar, get some ideas going. Stick to your plan. Don't leave room for other things in your plan. Leave room for things to be added to the plan, but stick to your plan. If you get distracted by the day-to-day continuously, so every 5 minutes a new issue comes in and you just work on those instead of looking at the longer term, your plan will never get actioned. And you end up not getting anything done. So keep that plan in the back of your mind always. And pace yourself. You can't do everything in one go. I really hoped to get PHP CS4 released before the end of the year. I already know it's not going to happen. There's just too much I'm working on, and at some point you need to prioritize, and you can't do everything at the same time. And sometimes that means things get delayed, and that's the way it is. Don't feel guilty about that. There's only 24 hours in a day, there's only so much you can do. Pace yourself and give yourself permission to also take a day off once in a while. Things I struggle with, and these are very personal and will be different for every maintainer. First thing I struggle with, and I really struggle with this a lot, is a slow turnaround on feedback. If I review a PR and someone responds the next day, I still have the context of that PR in my head. So I can reevaluate what they've changed really quickly and just merge. If they respond a month later, I need to completely regain that context, because by that time I'm 200, 300 PRs further down the line. So slow response to a PR is something I find really hard to deal with, but I can't demand of other people to be faster with that. I can ask them, but it doesn't always work. And they have their own, balancing act to do. So that's something I find difficult and need to find a way to work with, and I haven't found it yet. Another one is, when is good enough? You can't set the same standard for new contributors to the code base as you set for yourself. At the same time, I'm trying to reduce technical debt, not take on new technical debt. So finding a balance, when is good enough, is something I every day keep evaluating and reevaluating. I don't have an answer, but it's one of the things I find hard to deal with. Another one, it's lonely. There's always going to be people who do not agree with the decisions you take. And in the end, you are the one responsible, and the buck stops with you. So there's always going to be people happy, there's going to be people unhappy. The unfortunate thing about that is that the unhappy people are the most vocal. Generally, you will not hear the people who are happy. And the last thing, I don't know everything. When it's a code base you created from scratch, even if you've not looked at it for a year or two, it's like an old code. You put on that old code and it may smell a bit funny, and there may be some holes where the moths have gotten to it, but everything about that code feels familiar. When it's someone else's code base, it's not the same. I know a lot of the sniffer code base, but there are parts I've never had to touch. And unfortunately, those are also parts which don't have tests, which really makes it risky to then change something, because I don't know the reason why certain decisions were taken in the past. So, Code Sniffer, where are we now? Did Code Sniffer survive? Yes, it did. On the left, you see the contribution activity over the past year of the original Code Sniffer repo. On the right, the new repo. Well, you can see that huge spike initially where I worked through a lot of the backlog. And you can see that the old repo died down, the activity. Then again, you can also see that the new repo is not a huge level yet. People are still finding their way to it. Then again, please also look at the different scales of the two images. I can see Gina's face going, yeah, okay. Another image, similarly, again, on the left is from packages when I took over. On the right is the current numbers. You can see it's still steadily going up with new dependencies, about new people depending on the projects and more downloads, etc. And this is the old repo versus the new repo. The old repo existed for 12 years. The new repo now for 10 months. I don't think I'm doing badly. I think people are still finding their way to it. But for a 10-month-old repo, I don't think this is a bad start. What have we accomplished in that time? There's been 9 releases. Think of it this way. I took over 1st of December last year. The last release before that had been February. There's been 9 releases since. We've added complete runtime support for PHP 8.2.8.3. There's been lots of performance improvement, lots of added test coverage. As I say, a lot of the framework wasn't covered by tests at all, and I'm trying to mitigate that. I'm trying to fix that, but there's a long way to go because it's a large code base. There's been 1 new sniff. Now, why is that significant? It's the first new sniff which has been accepted in 3 years' time. A lot of new sniffs are nowadays being done in external standards for code sniffer, which are easy to work with. But a sniff actually being accepted in code sniffer itself was a long time since that had happened. Other than that, what you see here is a lot of focus on the end user experience and on reducing support requests. By revamping the help screen, making it easier for people to find the information they need without needing to ask me in an issue. By creating performance reports so people can analyze much more easily which sniffs are slow and report them to the sniff owner to fix that. By increasing the amount of documentation available about what sniffs expect. So a lot of help has been and attention has been given to improving the experience for the end user. So to finish off, how you can help? First, know your dependencies and really know them, know how well they are maintained, know what their status is in health, project health status. Start contributing in code, but not just in code. Contributing can also be documentation, can also be help with writing funding requests, can also be translations if the project allows for that. Contributing can take many forms. Please do not just think in code. And please start talking with companies about funding. Thank you.
We have time for a few questions.
Thanks for your conference. I mean it. Earlier, you mentioned the XidUtils repository. I couldn't find it. I think we will benefit for you to spell it or show it.
Sorry, which one?
The XidUtils.
Oh, XZ.
Repository.
And now I need to make this larger, I suppose. Zoom. That's not really helping, come on. No. I'm doing Control+ now, but that's still not working. Okay. Yeah, you've seen it? Anyone else? Okay, XidUtils. Please do Google it.
Thank you for the talk. As a maintainer myself, I've got a lot of questions, which I'm gonna ask later. The one question that I have is kind of a one takeaway for visibility and kind of bang for the buck when it comes to visibility. There's a lot of suggestions for maintainers that go into the direction of essentially gaining visibility and traction, but that takes a lot of time.
Yes, and
so is there one thing you found to have a lot of return for the investment that you can think of in your experience?
Well, there's one thing I know I did right, but I'm not saying that's something other people can easily do. Basically, I took time before announcing the takeover to set up all the funding platforms and to use that announcement to really make sure that people knew what was happening, that it was taken over, it was being taken over, but also that the project needed funding. And that has really helped. At the same time, as I say, contributions don't necessarily mean code. You can also ask people to start contributing by doing marketing for your project. That's not something which is strange to me. That is something which is very valuable and very worthwhile, and something which someone might feel far more comfortable doing if they're not familiar with code. So opening the project up to contributions is really not just code. Think in the wider sense, what are the skills you need? A maintainer can't be, one of those spiders who knows everything and does everything. But we don't have all those skills ourselves. Find the people to complement the skills you have. And again, that's not easy, and it takes time, but it is the only advice I can give you at this moment. And come and find me to talk more later.
Thank you very much, Juliette.
you.